Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House, brings you Voices of Justice, a series of podcasts where law enforcement officials, judges, and advocates come together to unravel the entangled web of domestic violence. Join us as we dive into the complex challenges faced by those on the front lines of justice, exploring real-life stories, legal nuances, and the human side of these cases. In each episode, our guests share their experiences, insights, and perspectives, shedding light on the multifaceted nature of domestic violence. Tune in for a compelling journey into the criminal justice system, where compassion meets the pursuit of truth and where professionals strive to bring justice to those affected by the cycle of abuse. I'm your host, Tina Johnson, Community Partnership Manager, alongside my co-host, Mary Ann Matheny, CEO of Hope House, Eileen Sheehan, COO of Hope House, and Randa Hager, Director of Outreach Services. Welcome to Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House. Chief Charles Iseman served as a law enforcement professional since 1991. Iseman's service has many different roles and assignments, including patrol officer, SWAT operator, undercover detective, patrol sergeant, investigation sergeant, administration captain, CALEA accreditation manager, and deputy chief. In 2011, he was honored to be appointed as the chief of police for the City of Grandview. Chief Iseman is a strong advocate of community policing, where citizens and police officers create positive relationships and solve problems together. In 2021, the International City County Management Association, ICMA, awarded the City of Grandview the Community Partnership Award based on the success of the police department's move toward the badge program. We have a partnership that is a powerful alliance between Hope House and the Grandview Police Department, which brings me to our guest today, Chief Iseman from the Grandview Police Department. Chief Iseman, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'm going to kick this off to Eileen. So, Eileen, if you wouldn't mind chatting just a little bit about the partnership with Hope House and the training aspect of the partnership.
Absolutely. So, Chief Iseman has been a part of the Grandview Police Department for 28 years that I've been around.
Yeah, 30 plus, right.
So Hope House has worked with the police department for at least 28 years in domestic violence cases in the municipality. We just got a grant through the Violence Against Women Office, an ICJR grant that will continue to strengthen our partnership. And part of that partnership, there is a domestic violence detective.
Correct.
That has been hired and paid for with this grant, and Hope House will have an advocate that is paid for by this grant specifically to work with victims of domestic violence in Grandview.
Correct.
Do you want to talk to a little bit about what that grant means to your community and your police department?
Well, it's the second time we've been awarded the grant, which is a good thing. The ability to have a detective that solely focuses on the domestic violence cases is huge to us right now, but prior to the grant, they had other duties and other cases they were working, but be able to have someone that's geared toward just that assignment is big for us, because we have a fair amount, like a lot of communities do, so it's good to have someone addressing that.
Also part of that grant, there is training for officers, and there are dollars that are specifically in the grant that will provide training, some national training that's out there, as well as some local training, and Randa Hager takes care of a lot of that training. Randa, do you want to speak to a little bit about the training that you do there with the officers?
Yes, so the training that I do is a combination of two different things. One of them being is a 2-hour post-certified training that really talks about the dynamics of domestic violence. It really speaks to the victim side of things, because going through the academy, the officers often hear the officer side of things, so we want to make sure that they understand what victims go through and also what that advocacy looks like. So what the support and the services look like and the programs and services that we have to offer. The other side of that is a tour. We know that one of the biggest fears is the unknown. So if officers can actually come to campus, see what victims will be staying at, when they go on scene, they can talk to victims and say, I've been there, I've seen it. And we don't have the expectation that they know everything by the time they leave that tour, but they have a better understanding, so they're able to pass that on to victims and make them feel a little bit more secure and comfortable when they're coming onto campus.
Part of that, over the years in the partnership, Grandview Police Department was one of the first to sign on to be a pilot project for the lethality assessment project. So that's been over 20 plus years ago.
Has it been that long?
I feel like it. At least. I feel like it's been at least that long.
Greg Smith days.
Yes, Greg Smith days. You're absolutely right. Shout out to Greg Smith for that one. Tell us a little bit about what the lethality assessment has meant to the Grandview Police Department, as well as partnership then with Hope House that comes along with that.
As far as the lethality assessment, I think it's great because a lot of our officers don't have a lot of experience being new officers coming out of the academy. Basically what they get in the academy is the officer perspective and how to stay safe and things like that. So to be able to have the protocols there and be able to kind of individualize things for the case they're dealing with, because not every case is going to be the same. So they can go through those steps. I think it's interesting too that this generation, they want to know the why on the backside so that they can see a case all the way through instead of just taking the report or making the initial arrest. The partnership we have with Hope House and the Advocate, where we can see that victims getting services and things like that down the road, which I think is key. I was telling someone the other day, I think the officers are better now than I was when I was on the road. Just they are more inquisitive. They do have more resources available to them. I think it's good for Hope House because it moves forward your mission, but it's also good for the community. I mean, that's who we're really serving it for. So, yeah, I think it's a really good program. We've had good results with it.
I think that's interesting when you say that they are interested in the why, because I think that's extremely helpful because domestic violence is complex. It's really hard for people to understand it when you don't live it every day, when you don't have that extra knowledge of the training. So I really appreciate to hear that means that they really have the ability then to connect with those victims. They have the ability to go that deeper level and understand what they're going through, and that can help them as they're helping that person go through the process. So I love to hear that.
It's interesting too. I think as you go through the career, a person goes through the life, you get a different perspective. When I first got on the police department, again, I was like most police chiefs, you work nights, you're on patrol for a lot of years. I remember we actually had one of our own. It was a record supervisor, and she was a victim of domestic violence, and I was actually killed in the incident. It was a horrible thing. Great lady, and it was a family member that had some issues, obviously, but it's different when you actually go through that, and then you see it from a different perspective. So it's good that the officers do want to see the backside of things and not just take the report, maybe make an arrest, maybe not, and then move on to the next call. So the other big benefit I see is I can remember working the road making calls, and you would get the same call back to the same address, and the cycle was never broken. And I think we're doing a better job of not having those repeat follow-ups where you can get the victim services and get them out of that situation a lot better, because I can remember houses I went to probably 15 times in different areas of the city. So I think we're doing a lot better thanks to these type of programs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Because I think that in law enforcement, when you call the police, it's because you have an immediate need. You need this incident to stop. You need to stop being hurt, whatever the case may be. And police are, by law, respond to the incident. Right. And in a domestic violence situation, it is really about the totality of what's going on. And that's what the lethality assessment really looks at, is brings out some of those other things that maybe it didn't happen, maybe the person wasn't threatened by a gun, but one of the lethality questions is there a gun in the home? Which we also know that domestic violence, the escalation when there is a gun in the home. So it takes it to that next step that maybe law enforcement, they're there because, and they only can be there for this specific incident they're called on. So this kind of gives them the rest of the story and to make that connection. So tell us a little bit about when you talked about when you were a street officer. You always been in Grandview?
Correct, yeah. Hired right out of college, and I've been in Grandview my whole career. And
so then you guys didn't have a lethality assessment, and you said you've been to the house 15 times. What were your resources?
Yeah, what were our resources back then? We'd have a pamphlet maybe that had some phone numbers on it, things like that. And then, of course, we were able to bring victims to the Hope House. We were still able to do that back in the day, so to speak. It was limited. I mean, that was before the internet had all the information out there. So it was normally a pamphlet with some information on it, and that was it. And you look at what we have now compared to that, and I think the services are exponentially just better for everybody. Things have changed for the better, I think, in that regard. I mean, domestic violence hasn't gone away, as you all know, around this table, right. But the resources are there, which weren't there before.
You're in a real unique situation because you are in a room full of people that can change the education, that can enhance the education for your officers. What is something that Hope House can do to build on the education that you're already getting?
I think the more visits to the academy, the situationals they have there toward the latter part of the academy, I think, is a good thing. The post-certified class you referenced earlier is good, and I think probably the most impactful is visits to roll call. Those groups of 6 or 8 officers together, they work as a team, they get trained as a team, so I think visits to roll call are big. They can ask questions, they feel more comfortable, their supervisor's there, so I think that's impactful to have those fairly routine visits there. Update them on legal updates or procedural updates with your own facility, or maybe a successful trend that you guys have picked up on somewhere else in the country that might be working that maybe we could try here in the greater metro. So just more face time, I think, comfort level with the advocates and our officers.
So it's fair to say that it's an ongoing process. It's just not a training and then we're done.
That's a good way to put it. I say the same thing about our community engagement. It's not like you just have one big barbecue a year and you say, oh, I got community engagement. It's something that has to be ongoing every week, every month, that type of thing.
I'm curious about the perception. What we hear often from clients or people that we interact with is that their involvement with law enforcement hasn't been positive. Perhaps as children, they were exposed to violence and then the police came, and when the police came, they took away their dad. So often, if that's your only experience with law enforcement, it could have this negative perception. Are there things that our partnership helps with that, or is there things that we could do to help with that as well, to try to help bridge any kind of gaps there might be between a victim who's in the moment? It's the crisis moment, as Eileen talked about. It's that particular event that you're responding to, and that's when emotions are high. And so I'm just curious if you think there's anything that helps with our relationship that helps that, or are there things we could do to help that further?
I think there is. I think it's not only just what the question is, but how the question's asked. So maybe it's like some what-if scenarios to teach our officers, if the victim's doing this or the children are there and that type of thing, I think are good. Maybe the officers never experienced that before, so it gives them another perspective of how to look at things. Interesting you talk about the children. I remember years ago, I'd been promoted, maybe I was a captain at the time, but there was this superintendent that came into town from down south somewhere, southern Missouri. And he was talking on the educational perspective, but he was talking about children and when they're at the scene of a domestic violence scene, and then the next day they go to school. Maybe they've been up most of the night, that type of thing, and he was addressing the teachers, but his point was they've been up all night and haven't had breakfast, that type of thing. They're not going to learn math or their spelling or whatever. They need to take care of the basic needs. It really hit home at the time. So, yeah, I think it's good that the officers see that, again, there's the bigger picture there, not just going through a checklist. Hey, is there grounds for arrest? I'm in an arrest and go on to the next ones. The more we can keep pushing that, kind of joke with people when I do the last interview when we do hiring for police officers, and can teach just about anybody to handcuff somebody or to shoot or whatever, but what is harder to teach is interpersonal skills. So as I'm looking for new candidates that are qualified, that's what I focus on, is someone that has some interpersonal skills that can transcend both domestic violence cases or even a burglary case, whatever. So I think that's important. I think we're getting better at that. I've seen more women getting into law enforcement than ever before, and I think that's a good thing, especially when dealing with these type of cases. They bring a different perspective, a softer side, maybe better interpersonal skills when it comes to that. I think it's a good trend. I have 10 times more female officers than I've ever had, which is, I think, a good thing.
I would say that's definitely a strength. My daughter's in law enforcement,
Oh,
so
great.
it's definitely
Thank you for her service then.
I will tell her. What piece of the training, or what piece specifically of the education that Hope House does with your officers can you say has been quite impactful?
I think it really is a cumulative effect. Like Eileen was saying, it can't just be one event. So I think it starts in the academy, coming to the classroom, or they're actually involved in the situationals toward the end of the academy, and then the ongoing training, the roll call training, things like that, and getting the buy-in from officers that says, hey, this actually does work, and getting some of your key influencers within the department, whether it's a sergeant or a senior officer, that says, hey, let's really listen to what they're saying. This does have an effect for the better. So I think it's a cumulative effect, not just one particular program.
Just like Eileen had said, it's not one isolated incident. Domestic violence is definitely a cycle of violence.
You talked about situationals, and I just maybe, Randa, if you could talk about what a situational is and what that looks like, because I'm not sure that's necessarily something everybody would understand. And I think it's a pretty powerful piece of the training.
It's actually one of my favorite things that I used to do, and I don't get to do them very often anymore, but the advocates get to go to the academy, and essentially they have rooms that are set up to look like a bar or to look like a home, and there's couches, and there's not only is it the cadets that are participating, but we have other agency partners, Hope House, another agency, Moxa, that have advocates there. And so we take turns being the victim, being the abuser. It's an opportunity for the officers to show up and what that's going to look like and how victims respond to them. Victims often don't respond to officers positively, and I think the majority of us know why that is, just because of the abuse, and they're scared, and they don't know their resources. So this is an opportunity for the officers to kind of see what that looks like and get that training and that experience before they go on scene. They're one of our favorite things to do. We do them a couple of times a year at the Academy, but we always love to do them more.
Eileen, do you want to talk about your experience in one of the situationals?
Sure. I was doing a situational at the Academy, and I was playing the victim, and actually the cadet arrested me in the situational. And honestly, I just started crying. You obviously weren't listening because you arrested me, and I shouldn't have been arrested. I was the victim of the crime. The other part of the situational is then we can talk to that after, there is an instructor in there who kind of goes through and gives them some feedback, and we're allowed to give that feedback as well. And then I said, hey, based on this and this, I don't think I should have been arrested. And the instructor agreed and said, there is self-defense. Just because he had a scratch on his arm doesn't mean that she was the primary aggressor. But it really made me cry. I mean, I just couldn't believe that. Now, I wasn't really arrested, so I got better. But it was powerful to me as an advocate, but also just doing that, I think, is a good thing for the advocates to see as well. Because I think law enforcement is a career that we see from the outside of a 911 call. It is not something that we necessarily see on the inside. And there's lots of things going on, and then an officer's trying to make these decisions, make everybody safe, keep themselves safe, and then follow the law. There's a lot. So I've always taken those situations as well as kind of a learning experience for myself, and train our advocates like how then to approach things differently. Maybe we should also put down some of our black and white thinking, and that it's not just that easy. Everyone wants to play Monday quarterback, is that what they say?
Right, yeah.
It's kind of given me always gave me a kind of a different look at things. But yeah, they made me cry. I didn't like that.
But I think that goes to show how powerful those situations can be for both the officers and for the other people who are participating, because you really were being the victim. I mean, you were in that role, and that had to have been I would imagine, I'm guessing that was very impactful to that officer to understand and hear your perspective afterwards. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
I would agree. I bet that was a huge learning for him or her, both with your feedback, and then I'm sure the instructor had some feedback for him as well. And it was bad that they made the mistake at the time, but better that they made the mistake there than later doing it with quote unquote real victim. Right.
Right. Absolutely. It's a learning experience, and that's what the Academy is about. You go to learn. It was a great learning experience, I think, again, for all involved, because it was also very impactful to me to make sure that when we're off doing the trainings that we're talking about self-defense and, what a primary aggressor looks like, and really why victims might not respond the way that you think they would respond because you're coming there to help them. Why doesn't everyone want to just get helped? Yeah, it was an experience.
After the training then, what outcomes have you seen? For example, do the domestic violence cases go up? Is there anything else that you've noticed after trainings?
I don't have the statistical data, but I would just say scenario-based, I would say they probably do increase a little bit, but I don't think that's a bad thing. That means we're getting people the services they need, getting them out of that immediate environment, and then also maybe breaking the cycle down the road. Although maybe it's bad for the police chief because the crime stats look elevated or whatever. I think in the long run, what really matters is that people are getting the help they need. So I would say our officers probably are better at it than what I was when I was 22 years old.
Yeah. Eileen always says, go ahead, Eileen, because I know what you're going to say.
You know what I'm going to say. I was going to say absolutely, because we know domestic violence is happening. So it's in the homes behind those closed doors. People will call the police if something's going to happen, if they can trust that system. You're right, domestic violence, your numbers do go up, but it means that they're trusting the system to call you, and that there's a partnership between Hope House and the police department, because you guys do your job, make the arrest. It's kind of the then what. So we're the then what. We're going to help connect to the next service, whether it's shelter, our attorney, supervised visitation, or therapy, housing, whatever the case may be. We're kind of that then what around the victim. So that partnership, I think, is really important, and you're right. We have many people say, well, we got a grant, our numbers should be going down. If your numbers are going down and you got a domestic violence grant, then I'm probably going to have a conversation with you, because your numbers should be going up.
Right.
I think we saw that even with the pandemic, where the numbers went down, but we know that the abuse was still happening. It just wasn't being recorded. I think that awareness piece is really happening, and I think partnerships like this is one of the reasons why the awareness piece is happening so well in all the training that we do. Do you want to speak a little bit about specifics on the training that we do here at Hope House, Randall?
The majority of the training that I provide is within the police department. So I actually go to the police department, so they come to campus. I prefer that they come to campus so that they can get that tour that I talked about earlier. We really talk about why victims stay. I think that's always the number one question everyone has. And we talk about that. We talk about those barriers. But then we also back that up up with, but don't forget that Hope House is over here, and so we have some of these options and choices. And reminding law enforcement, too, that leaving is a process. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. Officers often will vent their frustrations, and we, too, often vent our frustrations, too. We have the same frustrations about that. We help victims. We, too, get up at 2 a.m. and go to someone's bedside that's battered, broken, and bruised, and maybe help them with an emergency order of protection, walk them through that process, only for them not to show up to court. But I think the piece that I really try to zone into when I'm providing those trainings is why? Why do you think that victim didn't show up to court? You can still be frustrated, and that's okay. That's normal. But why didn't that victim come? So let's talk about that, and let's talk about what we can do, and then also talk about the programs and services that are out there to support you. And so those are some of the main things that I really zone in on the trainings, but I also talk about the process of an order of protection. It's a messy process. It's a long process. It's not easy. It's really important that officers understand that just because someone gets an order of protection, that's not the end-all be-all. We also know the majority of us, and I talk about this too, is the real concerns of homicide occur whenever the victim leaves. So talk about that, and then I actually will go through and talk about different cases that we've worked and assisted and supported that have been on the news. We also take a look at the media. We take a look at how things are being reported. How you think maybe a pile up on the highway was just a 3-car pile up, but actually it was a victim that maybe their abuser took the steering wheel and caused them to have an accident because they were in the middle of a fight. So really taking a look and looking at all those different things and piecing those together. But not just putting all the bad stuff out there and just talking about all these incidents, but also how can we help? What can we do? And also what Hope House is doing to try to do that. Lots of stuff.
And that's where that understanding the why comes in.
Right.
And I think that's
Yes.
what's so important to what you said earlier, Chief, that if you can understand that why, because there isn't anything easy about domestic violence. It's complicated.
Right.
It's messy, it's ugly, and it's dangerous. I mean, it's lethal. People die due to domestic violence. And I think the other misconception that we hear besides why doesn't she leave is the first question, but that somehow that once that person does leave, that it's all done and it's all over. And that we don't have anything that happens after that.
Right.
And we all know
Right.
It's just
that
beginning.
It couldn't. There's nothing further from the truth. That's the worst and most dangerous time is the actual act of leaving and
Right.
shortly thereafter.
Well, and I like to challenge officers, too, on that question. Instead of asking why victims stay, why aren't we asking the question of why do abusers think they can abuse? So really putting that focus back on the abuser instead of the responsibility with the victim. The victim, the majority of the time, is, as we perceive it in society, they've done their part, right? They've called the police, they've went and got the order of protection, they've tried to leave. But where's the responsibility of the abuser in all of that? And so that's really some of the things that I try to focus on as well. We try to keep that focus where it belongs. It's great. I really like those light bulb and aha moments when I'm training, and you can actually see it across the officer's face. And I go out in the community and do citizens academies as well. And they kind of go, oh, I wasn't thinking of it that way. And I'm like, oh, I'm not here to change your mind. Wink, wink. I'm just here to kind of just remind you that there's reasons why people do things. There's, people don't do things for no reason.
I think one of your other guests in this series is going to address the co-responder program, but I think that's another key aspect, partner with between Hope House advocates and the co-responders. That the case I referenced earlier when we first started about our records personnel who was the victim of a homicide or domestic violence and was killed, that was a situation. It was a family member that was suffering from mental health issues, and I just wonder if we would have had the resources we have today back then, maybe if that would have been avoided.
Well, I mean, I think that at a loss of that was, but right, as we go on, we know better and do better. Mm-hmm. So you know that that was not really how we wanted that to end, so what else can we do so that doesn't look like that?
Right.
So it's kind of that always forward thinking, and that's one of the things I'm very appreciative of the Grandview Police Department is that you're willing to be that partner and do that forward thinking. And even though when we come maybe with an idea, you think, I don't know what she's talking about, but you're still willing to put yourselves out there and be a part of that solution.
Right.
And that we're all human and that maybe this didn't work this time, but let's tweak it this way and it works, a different way. Because we do get called from the Grandview Police Department to come out when there's a bad incident. Going to the station, meeting with the victim as the officers are doing their statements, or at the hospital, sitting right there, assisting that. But again, there's that partnership. This now is a face of, here's an advocate and law enforcement working together. I think says something when you're responding at 2 a.m. together. So
made me think of something. Our most recent case, it actually was not our homicide. It occurred in Kansas City, but the victim was actually dropped off back in Grandview. And she was a younger victim, and think about the aha moments. I wonder if there's some type of program, maybe you already have one, where you get into that junior, senior year of the high school, because this young lady was a victim and she was still a high school student. It was horrible. It really was. So, I mean, maybe if she would have been more educated or knew that some of the resources are out there, maybe she would have been able to get out of that situation before that happened.
I think that's how these kind of conversations are so helpful, too, that hopefully we can reach people with new information, that they can hear it. Maybe they're going to hear something that you said that they hadn't been able to hear before, and that's what they're going to hold on to, and then they'll be able to take that forward. I think that's what is key about the work that we do is, you said earlier, you have to say it over and over. You can't just say it one time.
Right.
Because people hear it differently, and people will hear it when they're able to. I do want to say one other thing. I think one of the best things, or one of the best ways that we can honor those who have lost their lives is to acknowledge them.
Yes.
And to give them voice and to say, you mattered, and we are learning and going to do better. And so your sacrifice wasn't in vain, that we've learned. But I think just to be able to give voice and honor that person because of the sacrifice that they made. We can always say, what if we did this, or what if we would have done that? But unfortunately, we didn't, for whatever reason. I mean, we didn't know, or for you to give voice and give honor to her today, I think that's wonderful.
Absolutely.
Teen dating violence is a thing. I spoke to about 300 middle school girls this summer. And I brought 2 of our children's therapists with us because I'm not a therapist. I'm in communication. We sat there for a very long time afterward because there were so many middle school girls already having stories. We're empowering them. We go out and empower them and thinking we're getting it. You know, we're going and we're doing what we need to do for prevention. And I think we even need to go younger than those middle school girls.
Yeah, I mentioned that superintendent that came in and talked about that. I mean, some of these kids have been dealing with it since they can remember. My wife's in early childhood development. She sees it with her caseload too, so yeah.
Well, we know domestic violence is a learned behavior. We learn it, we learn how to interact with each other, and we learn what is okay and what's not okay, and however we were taught that is what we go forward with. I think that ongoing challenge for us to be able to say, wait a minute, this is how relationships are equal and people in the relationship are equal. And
when I went and talked to those girls, we didn't talk about domestic violence. We talked about what does a healthy relationship look like? And they were like, oh, wait, that's not what I'm in. I love my job, but it made me really love my job more to be able to give voice and empower those kids.
That's great. You're making that connection at that early of an age. You try to do the same thing with the school resource officers, making that connection, you know, whether it's in grade school, middle school, or high school. Maybe when the officer does show up at the house, they don't think of them as a bad guy.
Right.
So I think that's great. You're doing that and making the connection early. I think you put a good spin on it. You didn't talk about the violence. You talked about the way it should look. That's good. That's good.
I think I need to talk to your resource officer and partner up.
Yeah.
Get into some of those
That would
schools.
be good.
I think that'd be great.
I wrote that down just so you know. Got it.
That's a fantastic idea.
Well,
I'm all
planting
for it.
seeds, right? You're planting seeds and they'll grow when they need to grow. So you're planting the seeds, and that's the best we can hope for, is that we're putting it out there and someone will hear it when they need to hear it, like Marianne said. But they always have to say, planting a seed.
I always empower them when I leave, and I say it is so exciting to talk to the generation of prevention, and that's what you are. Leave that kind of seed with a kid. They remember that, and hopefully they'll take it with them. Thank you so much, not only for coming today, but thank you for your service.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Illuminating Hope, a podcast of Hope House. A special thank you to our newest recurring donor, Camille. Learn how you can support Hope House and domestic violence survivors by visiting hopehouse.net.